Hello, everyone. Welcome to MedAxi Forum. Today's topic is the evolution of church-state relations in the United States. One of the key driving forces behind the establishment and development of modern Western civilization is the concept of separation of church and state, promoted by Anglo-American conservatism. The conservative view of church-state separation entails: A. The government and the church are separate, yet both acknowledge God's sovereignty and are willing to submit to his authority. B. The government recognizes that it neither has the capability nor the right to interfere in people's religious lives. C. Faith and morality must be placed above politics rather than the other way around. This means that the separation of church and state is a one-way separation. While the government should not interfere in religious life, the church has the right to supervise and critique the government's actions. Faith and morality must remain superior to politics, not subordinate to it. Not only the church, but also the public, businesses, institutions, and media should be able to supervise and critique government actions. The Anglo-American conservative philosophy, grounded in Christian faith, clearly defines church-state separation as follows. The government should not interfere in religious affairs, and religious matters should not be political matters, but should remain independent of government control. Conservatism neither holds nor should hold excessive expectations regarding the government's role in moral affairs. The state possesses the power of coercion, but should not claim moral authority. When political power and religious authority merge, might becomes right. For politicians, the extent of their power does not necessarily correspond to their level of virtue. Therefore, the government should not use its coercive power to impose moral teachings on its citizens. Moral authority resides in civil society, not in the ruling regime. While the government may hold a moral stance, it should not use political power to enforce a particular moral agenda. The separation of political and moral authority stems from the government's proactive role in safeguarding the moral authority of civil society. Conservatism supports and upholds the religious life of the people, defending individual religious freedom. In modern civilization, religious freedom is the first freedom under constitutional order. Freedom of faith is the freedom of the human soul, making it the most invaluable liberty. Without the freedom of the soul, individuals cannot attain moral conscience. The freedom to follow one's conscience rather than coercive power is the key to human dignity and the core of all other freedoms. The level of civilization in human society is ultimately measured by morality, not military force. A nation's fundamental strength lies not in its material or military power, but in its spiritual and religious foundation. The idea of liberty originates from faith in transcendent values. What sets humans apart from animals is their capacity for transcendental belief. Denying the relationship between humanity and transcendence is tantamount to reducing humans to mere animals. Since the founding of the United States in 1776, church-state relations have undergone three distinct phases of evolution. Phase 1, from the founding of the U.S. to World War II, church-state separation remained in a proper one-way state. Phase 2, post-World War II to the late 20th century, church-state separation shifted into an absurd, reversed one-way state. Phase 3, in the 21st century, a movement toward the fusion of church and state, advancing toward a confessional state. Let's get started from Phase 1. Phase 1, from the founding of the United States to World War II. After the Protestant Reformation in 16th century Europe, numerous Protestant denominations emerged. How could these different denominations coexist peacefully within a single community? During America's founding period, various Protestant groups recognized that, based on the principle of church-state separation, they must explicitly oppose the establishment of a national church. If one denomination gained dominance, others would inevitably be placed at a disadvantage. The First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Ratified on December 15, 1791, as part of the Bill of Rights, this amendment made the United States the first nation to explicitly prohibit the establishment of a state religion in its constitution, while guaranteeing its citizens freedom of religion and speech. Thus, in the early years of the Republic, a broad consensus on church-state separation emerged across society, prohibiting the establishment of a national church and forbidding any interference with religious freedom. This meant that the government could not interfere with the affairs of any denomination and could only remain a neutral entity. Thus, the concept of religious freedom was born. In reality, both religious freedom and church-state separation are concepts unique to Christian societies. Non-Christian societies tend to be autocratic, making religious freedom practically impossible. The form of church-state separation established in the early United States was one-directional. The government was prohibited from interfering in religious affairs, but religious communities were not restricted from supervising or criticizing political affairs. However, modern left-leaning intellectuals and politicians have misinterpreted the First Amendment to mean a two-way separation of church and state. Notably, the Founding Fathers did not use the phrase separation of church and state in the First Amendment. The original wording, no establishment of religion, nor prohibition of its free exercise, was chosen for a profound reason. At the time of the American Revolution, the Christian faith was deeply ingrained in society. Massachusetts, the epicenter of the Revolution, was also the stronghold of the Puritan Congregationalists, and many of the state's founding fathers were devout Puritans. Under such an atmosphere, most people believed that the church should have the power to supervise and restrain the government, limiting the reach of state power. Because of this climate, the original draft of the U.S. Constitution faced fierce opposition from anti-federalists, who insisted on adding an amendment ensuring the federal government would not interfere in religious affairs, allowing religious freedom to operate freely at the state level. Even James Madison Jr. (1751 to 1836), the principal architect of the Constitution and a committed Federalist, had to clarify that the original omission of religious liberty was not an attempt to suppress it, but rather a desire to entrust religious matters entirely to the people. The sensitivity of religious issues nearly led to the collapse of the Constitutional Convention multiple times. At one point, Benjamin Franklin (1706 to 1790) suggested that, like the Continental Congress before it, the convention begin each day with prayer, seeking God's blessing. However, this proposal was ultimately abandoned out of concern that choosing a minister from any specific denomination might imply favoritism toward a particular national church. Beyond affirming that religious matters should be left to the states, Madison also expressed his deep faith, stating, "The U.S. Constitution was completed under God's guidance because the very ability to draft such a constitution is itself a miracle. Without divine guidance, it is difficult to imagine that humanity could accomplish such a feat." From the subsequent historical experience of the United States, the principle of the government must not interfere in religious affairs, but religious communities may influence government affairs proved to be one of the most ideal models of church-state relations in human history. After the founding of the United States and before World War II, the government's non-interference in religious matters led to the dissolution of church courts, as they no longer had enforcement mechanisms. Church law merged with secular law, and ecclesiastical courts ceased to exist. Without a state church, there were no heresies, and no government-imposed punishments for heresy. The church could only resolve disputes through internal division, leading to the proliferation of Protestant denominations. Thought is always intertwined with faith. As the state ceased to interfere in religious matters, it also lost its justification for interfering in intellectual affairs, resulting in the complete liberation of human thought. Americans embraced the joy of free thinking and exploration, freely navigating the vast ocean of ideas. At the same time, each Protestant denomination viewed itself as a bearer of God's spiritual sword, vigorously engaging in missionary work, founding schools, building hospitals, and carrying out charitable efforts. Denominations competed fairly and constructively, striving to attract more followers by offering better religious services. From the founding of the United States to the outbreak of World War II, church-state separation functioned in a proper, one-directional manner. This period was marked by flourishing diversity, moral integrity, strong work ethics, and vibrant community spirit. It was an era of political transparency, high moral standards, and a hard-working, pure-hearted society, one in which America rapidly rose to become the world's most politically advanced, economically prosperous, educationally developed, technologically innovative, and militarily powerful nation. However, hidden within America's economic and social prosperity, a fatal crisis was already brewing. All right, these are contents of Phase 1. Let's enter into Phase 2. Phase 2. From post-World War II to the late 20th century. After World War II, leftist liberal ideology increasingly permeated the United States, with the Democratic Party controlling Congress for 60 years, 1934 to 1994. The walls of America's limited government were gradually dismantled, and the inherent tendency for the expansion of power began to break through and spread in American society. In the process, the government began to obstruct religious groups from intervening in political affairs. The Johnson Amendment was proposed in 1954 by a U.S. Senator, later President Lyndon Baines Johnson, 1908 to 1973. This amendment modified Section 501c3 of the U.S. Tax Code, stipulating that tax-exempt organizations, including churches, would lose their tax-exempt status if they engaged in certain activities. These activities included directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political activity, supporting or opposing any candidate for public office, providing campaign funds to candidates, or publicly expressing their positions. The true purpose of the U.S. government's implementation of the Johnson Amendment was to prohibit these organizations from expressing political opinions, especially opinions opposing the government or the views and policies of candidates, by threatening to revoke their tax-exempt status. This law created a chilling effect. Some Christian churches, fearing the loss of their tax-exempt status, deliberately instructed their pastors to avoid political and social topics on the pulpit, especially controversial issues such as abortion, homosexuality, euthanasia, and embryonic stem cell research. In addition to congressional legislation limiting church intervention in politics, an important component of the American judicial system, the U.S. Supreme Court, has through its rulings forcefully intervened in the Christian faith of citizens. In the United States, a nation founded on the devout Christian faith of its people, we have seen the most prominent branch of the federal government, the U.S. Supreme Court, continue over the past 70 years to openly and persistently infringe upon and deprive American citizens of their religious freedom. In 1948, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that evangelizing in public schools was unconstitutional. In 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that distributing Bibles in public schools was unconstitutional. In 1961, the U.S. Supreme Court invalidated the requirement for public officials to affirm belief in the existence of God. In 1962, the U.S. Supreme Court prohibited public prayer in nationwide public schools. In 1963, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that reading the Bible in public schools was unconstitutional. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that banning the teaching of evolution in public schools was unconstitutional. In 1980, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that displaying the Ten Commandments in public schools was unconstitutional. In 1985, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that holding a moment of silence ceremony in public schools was a disguised form of prayer and ruled it unconstitutional. In 1992, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that holding prayer ceremonies at public school graduation ceremonies was unconstitutional. From the end of World War II to the late 20th century, church-state separation in the United States existed in an absurd, reversed one-way manner. All right, these are contents of Phase 2. Let's come to Phase 3. Phase 3. Today in the 21st century. In 2021, leftists in the United States spared no effort in promoting critical race theory (CRT) nationwide. Critical race theory has been introduced into primary and secondary school curricula. Government agencies and large corporations actively organize training for employees. Mainstream media fan the flames, and even the military and police are required to undergo training in critical race theory. Critical race theory is tailor-made for the United States as an ideological weapon designed to comprehensively criticize and subvert American institutions, history, culture, and traditions. It posits that what determines a person's destiny is not individual character, effort, talent, or luck, but merely race. A famous short video by educational media outlet PragerU illustrates this with an example. Suppose you run a small shop and two customers enter simultaneously, one black and one white. Whom do you serve first? If you serve the black customer first, you are a racist because you believe that black people pose a security risk and want to send them away quickly, thereby discriminating against them. If you serve the white customer first, you are a racist because you believe that white people should be served first, thus discriminating against black people and considering them second-class citizens. In any case, no matter what you do, you are controlled by racist ideology. Why is the United States a great nation that has long been a model of a mature rule of law society in the modern world, and champions freedom and human rights so chaotic and disorderly today? The root cause is the long-standing equal opportunity movement, affirmative action, propelled by leftist liberal ideology. This movement's promotion of identity politics and its usurpation of God's justice through political correctness have sown the seeds of today's evil consequences. Between a strong person and a weak person, is the weak person necessarily righteous? Not necessarily. In most cases, an unconditional favoritism toward the weak serves only to demonstrate one's own sense of moral superiority. Conversely, is the strong person necessarily righteous? Not necessarily. In most cases, unconditional favoritism toward the strong amounts to bribing or currying favor with them. The political correctness promoted by the equal opportunity movement openly and explicitly favors vulnerable and easily harmed groups. We see that in the United States, a great nation that stands for freedom and human rights and has been a global exemplar. The bullying resulting from political correctness has led citizens to gradually lose their freedom to express their true individual opinions. In fact, today the mainstream population in American society is facing increasingly obvious discrimination in areas such as education, employment, public opinion, and law enforcement, a new form of discrimination caused by anti-discrimination measures. If vulnerable groups are overly coddled, on the one hand, they may receive many benefits in the short term, but on the other hand, excessive coddling of a group will hinder its long-term development as they may become complacent or lazy, leading to prolonged weakness. When you execute judgment, do not do wrong. Do not show partiality to the poor or favor the powerful. Judge your neighbor in righteousness. Leviticus 19:15. What is fundamentally wrong with this bizarre form of political correctness? It lies in its bias in favor of the weak, which is not the highest moral standard. Such preferential principles, by usurping God's justice and love, will inevitably deviate from their original intent, lose their meaning, and cause more serious social problems. Do not follow the crowd in doing wrong. Do not pervert justice by siding with the crowd in a dispute, nor show favoritism to the poor in a lawsuit. Exodus 23:3. The admonitions of God in the Bible shine with wisdom. Vulnerability does not equate to righteousness. Therefore, institutions must curb the innate sinful tendencies in all people. One of the great conservative thinkers, Lord Acton 1834 to 1902, once said, "Sympathy and love can lead people to overlook justice and favor sin. This is the most insidious danger, and most humanitarian disasters stem from it." In the mid-20th century, Princeton University professor John Rawls, 1921 to 2002, published a theory of justice, advocating that rights take precedence over the good and that justice is fairness. Attempting to define social justice on their own has long been the pursuit of these leftist liberal intellectuals. However, those with a conservative mindset understand this clearly as an example of rational arrogance. Modern liberalism appears to uphold the value of human reason, but in reality, it overestimates human reason, transforming it from a limited order into an usurpation of truth. In his book, The Crowd and Democracy, Sir Henry Summer Maine, 1822 to 1888, Social Progress, Maine recognized that human progress and the corresponding aspirations are fragile creative achievements. The hallmark of Western social progress is the evolution from identity to contract among nations, and the primary means to achieve this is through private property and contractual freedom. Identity politics, or an identity society, which sets people's rights and obligations based on identity, is a privileged society, a fragmented society, a society governed by individuals rather than by law, and a society doomed by fate. In contrast, a contract society, which bases people's rights and obligations on contracts, is an egalitarian society, a connected society, a society governed by law, and a civilized society. Identity politics creates barriers among people, leading society to fragment and collapse. People of different identities partition themselves, drawing borders and considering their neighbors as adversaries. In such a society, people are classified into different ranks based on skin color, origin, wealth, and occupation. Each group has its own beliefs, sentiments, rights, customs, and ways of life, with no common thoughts or feelings among them. In an identity society, people adhere to fatalism, believing that everything is predestined. In a contract society, people uphold a philosophy of competition. Everyone is born equal, and everyone has the right to pursue freedom and achieve the American dream. Contemporary conservative thinker Russell Kirk, 1918 to 1994, warned early on about American society, the evolution from identity to contract is the result of aristocratic thought, and the regression from contract back to identity will be the consequence of a self-righteous democratic system. Sir Maine also keenly observed, leftist liberal politicians are sincerely flirting with collectivism, and in doing so, they betray freedom and progress, because the measure of progress is freedom. Identity politics, by placing equality above freedom, will inevitably lead to the path of enslavement. A civilized society is a competitive society. Competition among people is both economic and cultural. If a civilized group abandons competitive values and undergoes a continuous process of degradation, they will find themselves forced back into the vicious competition of natural selection, where life is marked by rampant violence. Once this process of degradation is complete, civilization will correspondingly regress to the barbarism indicated by identity. Anglo-American conservatism defends the contract and opposes identity. Conservatives understand that emotional collectivism can turn into a destructive, ruthless form of enslavement. President Reagan once said, "If fascism ever comes to America, it will appear under the guise of liberalism." Today, in the 21st century, political correctness has become a new religion. Leftist liberals are transforming America into a confessional state under the banner of political correctness. A confessional state is one in which the government officially formulates and implements specific beliefs, ideologies, and ideas, effectively merging church and state, and not allowing the existence of other beliefs, ideologies, or ideas. Over the past decade, Western liberalism has grown increasingly left-wing, using political correctness to suppress dissent. This suppression has now extended beyond the realms of morality and culture, acquiring significant systematic and institutional characteristics. Europe and the United States are gradually moving toward becoming confessional states. In the 21st century, although it is now difficult for someone to be physically eliminated for their speech or ideas, other forms of covert violence occur, such as losing one's job, being stripped of one's identity on social media platforms, or facing personal threats. The political correctness promoted by leftist forces is becoming a new religion, rallying its followers to persecute heretics. The specter of church-state fusion is haunting the United States, with universities, media, social organizations, and Hollywood seemingly united in this effort. In today's West, academic orthodoxy is derived from higher education, and university professors are considered the custodians of intellectual orthodoxy. Universities, from ancient Greece through the Middle Ages to the present, have always been arenas for free debate of ideas, and were meant to be the bastions of intellectual freedom. However, in recent years, American universities have been taken over by leftist intellectuals, who spread the creed of political correctness and resist anyone or anything that does not conform to this ideology. The so-called correct ideas are essentially leftist liberal ideas masquerading under the banner of freedom. Today, students and teachers in American universities can no longer easily express what they want to say. When there is only one voice on campus and vigorous debates no longer exist, what is the original purpose of the university? Along with the threats to academic freedom, freedom of thought, and freedom of speech in universities, freedom of publication is also under threat. In today's Western world book, censorship has reappeared, though in a more subtle form. Publishers require all writers to self-censor to ensure their ideas are politically correct, and public opinion leads publishers to self-censor as well, fearing the publication of works by authors with controversial ideas. Classical liberals believed, "Your freedom to swing your fist ends where my nose begins." But today's leftist progressives argue, "Your freedom of expression ends where my feelings begin." If speech that might offend others is forbidden, then we will have nothing left to say. Contemporary Western leftist liberalism increasingly exhibits characteristics of unifying thought throughout society and excluding dissent. Western society is becoming a confessional state in the 21st century, led by leftist liberalism into a dark abyss. All right, that concludes the entire content of today's lecture. I hope it has provided you with some inspiration. Thank you all for listening. May God bless you and your family.